I guess we'll start. Okay. Good good morning, everyone. Just maray naga po sa tuyang gabos, and welcome to the fifth week of our Balongibog Talks COVID-19 segment. So actually, um, uh, we are now on our fifth week since we started this lecture um, last April 13 with Dr. Danilo Hirona. So today we're going to start our fifth week with the first ever lecturer of our Balongibog Talks last August 2019. So si Sir Darren din yung nagpuon kang lecture kang Balongibog Talks natin. So we're happy to have him this morning. So this podcast series for this podcast we have two lectures, but the two lectures are will tackle both a bit global and regional concerns of the pandemic. So for this lecture, we're going to talk on ASEAN community responses on of the COVID-19, and tomorrow we're going to have another multipolarity lectures or analysis on the pandemic. So this podcast series is sponsored and organized by the Partido State University through the Centers of Partido Studies, directed by Dr. Danilo Hirona, the Partido Institute of Economics, directed by Roland John Bulao, um, the Museo de Sarog, the College of Arts and Sciences, headed by Dean Erlene de Basilia, um, the Office of the University President, Dr. Raul G. Bredicina, the Office of the Board Secretary, Ms. Leanne Odonio, the PASPEC of Museum Student Volunteers, and Ateneo Dinaga University Social Science Department, um, chaired by Mary Joyce Bulao. So I'm Earl Hernandez, and I'm the Museo de Sarog curator, and I'll be the moderator for this lecture. So let me remind everyone, for our Zoom participants, that this lecture is currently being recorded, and will be posted on our museum page later. So for this morning, as I have introduced a while ago, we have Darren Ramon Avestruz. Um, currently finishing his graduate studies at the Asian Center from the University of the Philippines. He's also a former faculty of the College of Arts and Sciences of the Partido State University. So we're very happy to have Sir Darren again with us this morning. So, Sir Darren.
Thank you, Earl. Good morning, everyone, and all to the participants for our webinar lecture for the morning. Basically, when we were conceptualizing the topic for this particular podcast, Earl and I were talking about uh, possible consequences of the pandemic, not only in the Philippines, but beyond our borders as well. Well, given the concept and the trend of globalization that we are currently experiencing, it is only rightful perhaps to get to know as well how our neighboring countries, our neighboring states are responding with the same pandemic or with the same experience that they are having right now. So basically, since this is still a broad topic in general, um, I would like to pinpoint that we'll be focusing this morning on the specific responses of the states in the ASEAN community, but not necessarily go into deep in details in depth. No, um, what we will do is try to contextualize the mechanisms, the decisions, the political actions of public officials in the Southeast Asian community and give light as to how they come to such actions, to such decisions. No? Um, so we will be talking about responses of um, the ASEAN community officials in specific and the macro level as well. So you see, um, we will focus on this particular uh, part of the world, the Southeast Asian region, in which we have the ASEAN community, the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, as its regional organization. We acknowledge that there are 10 current states, member states of the ASEAN, and it is also a common knowledge to everyone that um, there's supposedly an 11th state, but currently it is still under an observation status, the state of Timor-Leste, pending its membership to the ASEAN. So it is also one of the um, topics to look forward to in the next annual assemblies of ASEAN, if they would permit, they would already acknowledge the state of Timor-Leste as an official member state of ASEAN. So basically, we have 10 member states as of now of ASEAN. We have Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Laos, Vietnam, Brunei, and of course the Philippines. But I'd like to uh, say it that say that we will not be detailing anymore the efforts in our own country, in our state, because of course, well, probably we already are very much aware of what is happening around. So what we will do is try to um, give light to our audience as to, again, how these states, these neighboring countries of ours responded to our pandemic. So the question is, how is Southeast Asia responding to the COVID-19 pandemic? No? So that's our question for the morning. You see, um, the coronavirus has shown a spotlight on discrepancies in the region's wealth, rule of law, and even governance structures. Although the region is grouped together through the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or the ASEAN, the region is in reality a conglomeration of different types of government. So it's very much a knowledge to people that the diversity in the ASEAN community is unlike any other regional organization. So hence the tagline of ASEAN unity in diversity. So this has made organizing a collective response to transnational crises such as this pandemic extremely difficult. So you see, um, even though we are considered as a regional organization, it is still difficult for each and everyone to respond in accordance to us as to how each country, each member state also wants to respond. There goes lies the problem that even though we actually practice in ASEAN the principle of non-interference, or yung hindi pakikialam sa domestic affairs and even the international affairs of ASEAN member states, it is the very principle itself that makes it difficult for ASEAN countries to gain and even create a collective response from its members, given its differing opinions and perspectives on different circumstances, different scenario. So right now, let's have the question. So how is Southeast Asia responding to the COVID-19 pandemic? So we'll start with the response of Singapore. So you see, the state of Singapore is uh, one of the first countries in the world, and in Southeast Asia as well, to report cases of COVID-19 on January 23. So given the stature of Singapore as a city-state, we would probably expect quick actions, quick responses from its government. So that's what happened. You see, after the first reported case of COVID-19 on January 23, 2020, the Singaporean government already instituted social distancing policies, and well, they made ample use of its vast network of surveillance technology. That's also, on the other side, that's also something that the international media is criticizing them about. You see, this particular surveillance technology is also a point of criticism in terms of um, curtailment of other human rights that we have. So particularly the freedom of privacy. So although responses were the government responses were based on their experience in handling the SARS outbreak of 2002. So for those who could still remember, no, the outbreak of SARS in Asia in 2002 also surprised everyone. No? In Singapore, learned the lessons from the past, and so they were able to conduct immediate responses and mechanisms for this one. Although Singapore is very much known for its liberal authoritarianism. It is run by a single party with very limited alternative party participation since its inception in 1965. So that's why um, they are able to roll out regulations, very strict regulations in terms of containing this pandemic in their city state. Some may say that they have very steep penalties. They have very steep penalties to such infractions because they are giving jail time of up to 6 months and very steep fines up to 10,000 Singaporean dollars for violating social distancing rules. So there are also cases reported that there have been revocation of permanent resident status of certain non-citizens for violating the stay home notice. So uh, although given that particular um, response by the government, um, it has been noticed that the curve of the COVID-19 cases in Singapore also were decreased. No, they were considered as a success story in Southeast Asia. But the question is, why can't the other states in Southeast Asia replicate this model? For example, in the Philippines, why can't we actually do the same thing or roll out the same regulations? That's just like Singapore. Well, obviously, the answer is the replication of this model is actually a challenge not only in the Philippines but to many states, even those which are advanced in terms of technology and even in wealth. Why is that so? Well, you see, Singapore is relatively smaller, no, in terms of land and population. So given their size, given their relatively smaller size in terms of land mass and population, tendencies are, of course, it is relatively easier for them to contain people and roll out regulations just like also, there is a relatively wealthier equipped, robust healthcare system that they have, um, in accordance with uh, the difference in landmass and population. Um, Singapore has significantly better healthcare system than most countries, especially in Southeast Asia. And on top of that, they have a very rich and strong tradition of the rule of law. So and probably of all those three criteria, the last one would be the most difficult one to replicate because you talk about culture, you talk about disposition of people. You know well that in the Philippines, people are free to react to certain policies of the government using social medias, using several platforms that they know. But in Singapore, that tradition of rule of law, that strongman rule that they have, that they acknowledge, is also something that they made use, or they they took advantage in um, containing this pandemic. Okay. Although, on the flip side, doon naman tayo sa medyo questionable siguro, or criticized din no, na ginagawa ng State of Singapore as of now. You see, their management of foreign workers is a point of criticism right now. In the latest data that we have, based from the survey from John Hopkins University, even though Singapore has already the term that we know that we use, right, is flattening the curve. But you see, um, the second wave of infections that Singapore occurred actually came from um, a large population of foreign workers being housed and contained in congested dormitories. So we know that that um, Singapore is a cultural haven, no? It's the gateway to the Southeast Asia, and hence um, this particular high number of foreign workers is not anymore surprising. That's why 90% of the cases, the infected cases in the second wave, the so-called second wave of infection, actually came from those particular workers congested in certain dormitories. Yan sinasabi nila na um, the Singaporean state was able to contain the pandemic within their local population. But at the same time, um, yung mga bagong cases ng COVID-19 is actually coming from the dormitories na kung saan hinaus nila yung foreign workers na hindi nila napapauwi. Um, Most of the reasons actually is that um, these migrant workers are still in debt, and their employers actually uh, didn't allow them to umuwi na to go back to their respective home countries, and so they are staying in Singapore. But yun, the drastic measure of the Singaporean state is to house them, no, into dormitories wherein some reports would say na they are very much congested already. That's Singapore for you. So next is we have Cambodia. So now there is this particular headline in a um, in an online media website which says that in Cambodia there is a reporter jailed for quoting Prime Minister Hun Sen on COVID-19. No, it is in Cambodia wherein um, the government actually was in denial about the threat of coronavirus from the start. In fact, Prime Minister Hun Sen refused to stop flights between Cambodia and China. And uh, siya mismo yung nag-grant ng access sa napakaraming barko na galing ng China. Okay? And just to justify na hindi naman seryoso yung threat ng coronavirus. The government even um, said na it's just a flu. It was just an ordinary flu. And yun, along with limited medical testing for people, no, um, it is they are criticized now because the government is allegedly misusing the pandemic to crack down on dissenters to the point that even the parliament, no, the Cambodian parliament granted Prime Minister Hun Sen of new powers, uh, which allegedly would crack down dissenters and curtail freedom of speech. In fact, 17 people were already arrested in late January, either for speaking out or spreading alleged fake news about COVID-19, or because they align with the former opposition party. So there was also one instance in which they were condemned by by the Universal Human Rights Watch. Na there was a 15-year-old girl arrested for using her social media post about worrying, no, na baka mahawaan siya ng COVID sa kanyang eskwelahan dahil hindi pa pinopostpone yung classes. So that's the state of Cambodia that we have now. Well, in fairness, ano naman, nag-soften na yung stance, no, the stance of Prime Minister Hun Sen already softened to the point na they already closed their borders, no, but also saying that the initial actions and responses that they did were justifications to Cambodia's deep ties with China. So you see, since they are neighboring countries, So they favored international relations, no, diplomacy, over responses. So that's Cambodia for us. Now, di pa tayo, Myanmar naman, the hot takes that we have is the armed conflicts, that were already happening long before this pandemic started. In Myanmar, there has been a displaced Muslim minority, the Rohingya community since August of 2017. So this is more of a cultural and religious related conflict since August of 2017, and many uh, displaced Muslim minority are actually displaced in the borders of Myanmar and Bangladesh, wherein as much as they were accepted in the borders of Bangladesh, the Bangladesh government instituted internet blackout and phone usage restrictions in the refugee camps. So in effect, these people are actually, you know, um, they are barred from receiving any news outside, you know, of the borders, and because of that as well, they are not being given um, testing kits. They are not being subjected to medical operations because they are already at the borders of Myanmar. So with that, um, there is a lingering effect of this particular conflict as to how the political decisions of the Myanmar government is coming into action. You see, there's also this particular problem of um, the shortage of doctors. You see, there is this particular um, data released by the Myanmar government that the ratio of the doctors that who are available for this kind of experience that they have 6.1 doctors per every 10,000 people. So ganun siya kakonti, no? Um, well, you see, there is also a big question mark because Myanmar was supposedly a rejuvenated state, a rejuvenated nation because of the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi. So the 1991 Nobel Peace Prize winner was supposedly um, uh, a, a a new light, no, to the governance of Myanmar. But lately, critics have been pointing out that there are questions or loopholes about the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi and their political party, the National League for Democracy, because they didn't do any actions or responses during the Rohingya conflict. So ito ay malayong-malayo doon sa nakagisnan ng ng mga tao, hindi lang sa Myanmar kundi sa buong mundo. Uh, be, that Aung San Suu Kyi being a modern era icon for democracy, no? Um, well, as we know, being a Nobel Peace Prize winner and being um well, hindi siya elected officially, no, because um there's this current constitutional provision in the Myanmar government na hindi pwedeng maging president yung someone who has a uh, affiliation to foreign nationalities because her husband is a foreign national, no? So with that, her official capacity is state councilor, but it's very much believed that she is still the one leading the National League for Democracy behind the scenes. So at the same time, there is public pressure because there is the uncertainty of the November 2020 elections. And supposedly, this is a good time for them to react and to respond, given that before the pandemic start, there's already been a waning support from the ethnic minorities in Myanmar, no? And political analysts say that the 2020 elections will actually serve as the referendum for this administration. And yun ang isa pang pwede natin i-look forward because supposedly the elections will be held on November 2020. But given the election, some already call for its postponement or rescheduling. So that's also another political context that we could look into the state of Myanmar. So next is we have the state of Indonesia. So this is an article from the Diplomat in which they were actually looking into the possibility that Indonesia is having, if not already, is looking into a looming food crisis, if not already having one right now. So there has already been questions about Indonesia's food security, no, long before the COVID-19 pandemic started. So in the situation of Indonesia, there was an initial lack of public transparency on information regarding the situation. There were actually reports that um, on public, um, President Widodo even said na uh, same with with the response of Cambodia, that it was just another flu. And after a few weeks' time, President Widodo also acknowledged and even admitted that the government was consciously hiding some information. No, they were controlling information because they did not want to cause any panic to the public. Some top health officials even said na the lack of the early low number of cases in Indonesia was attributed to the strength of prayer of the Indonesian people, and they even recommended that when the time comes that na tumaas yung case ng COVID-19 sa Indonesia, they will just recommend herbal medicines. So initially, it was more of a laughing stock, no, in the in the perspective of the Indonesian government. But later on, when cases started to spike, you see the pandemic actually put pressure on the existing national food crisis that they have, more so because they restricted the access to the international supply chains and of course the distribution networks. You see, a big percentage of the food supply of Indonesia is being imported. So their domestic food supply has long been supplemented by imports, despite long-standing calls for self-sufficiency. This reliance on the import of key staples is actually attributed to the country's poor domestic production, which has failed to keep up with the country's increasing population. So that's one of the biggest criticisms in the second administration of second term of the administration of President Widodo already. You know? And even at the local level, transportation vehicles of food supplies have been prevented from entering communities. So it put the Indonesian people to in a crossfire, no, between how the Indonesian government respond and the existing reality of the pandemic crisis and the food crisis that they are experiencing at the same time. Yeah. Meanwhile, in Malaysia, no, the Malaysian government actually is already starting to ease their lockdowns, no, despite lingering concerns among many sectors in their country. But the main proponent of this easing of lockdown is actually from the business sector. They have become anxious, no, to reopen businesses because the economy is already taking a hit. Well, it's the same with any other Southeast Asian community that we have right now. So the easing of lockdown is actually um, splitting public opinion, no, amid fears that the sudden reopening of economic activities could spark a new wave of infections. Although, um, learning from the earlier mistake of Singapore, na they did not um, they didn't give um, testing kits. No, they they didn't. Of course, they didn't prioritize foreign national workers in Singapore. So that's why andun na yung bulk ng cases nila sa ngayon. The Malaysian government provided compulsory screening for all foreign workers in all sectors. So ito din yung isang magandang ginawa nila na learning from the mistake of Singapore. They didn't want their foreign nationals to be also infected, and then later on, pag pinauwi nila sa kanya-kanyang um, home countries, wala rin. So yun, that's Malaysia for you. Now, next is we have the most successful story, no, in Southeast Asia. It's Vietnam, the state of Vietnam, and they are being applauded by many countries in the world, no, and even the World Health Organization, na Vietnam was able to crush the coronavirus outbreak to the point na even up until today, they haven't recorded single death case. Wala pa, no, zero deaths recorded sila hanggang sa ngayon. They are called one of the few bright spots in whole of Asia, no, considering its relative disadvantage in economy and larger population to manage. So kanina we were talking about Singapore, na well, Singapore has the advantage of technology and wealth, no. They have a bigger economy, and then at the same time they have a relatively small number of people to manage. Ito naman kabaligtaran. Vietnam's economy is even ranked lower than the Philippines, no? They are really in a disadvantage in terms of um, economic policies and even infrastructures and even their public healthcare system. But they were able to manage the pandemic in their own terms. How did they do it? First, we will actually notice na the the head of the Ministry of Public Health in Vietnam has actually um, retired, sometime in late 2019. And even without a designated successor, they were able to combat the virus kahit na yung officer in charge ng Ministry of Public Health office is actually a a an engineer by profession. So it goes to show, no, na the bureaucratic structure of the Vietnam is actually very good. You see, in even in 2014, no, 2014 pa lang, through the efforts of then Minister Dr. Nguyen Tien, they were able to create the Office of the Emergency Response to Disease, specifically built, no, specifically created to combat such experiences like what we are having right now. So this is actually based on their initial response to the outbreaks of SARS and H1N1 pandemics in the early 2000s. So dahil dun sa experience na yun, they decided, no, along with the help of the World Health Organization, to create this particular office specifically created para sa ganitong klase ng ng karanasan sa kanila. So at the same time, political analysts have been applauding them for their transparency of central and local government units because it is being noticed na mataas yung public trust rating ng Vietnamese officials both in the national and the local levels, no. They were not withholding any information to the public, unlike the previous cases that we have discussed. Upon recording their initial case, the Vietnamese government already imposed strict and immediate measures like border control, social distancing, ganyan. But at the same time, no, um, expecting the effects of the pandemic in their economy, given nga na they're at a relatively they are at a relative disadvantage, no, in terms of economy. They have already spent 27 trillion dong, or an equivalent of 1.16 billion dollars, no, as part of their stimulus packages to businesses, such as tax breaks, delayed tax payments, and even reduced land lease fees. So at the same time, people are highly uh, they are trusting their government, because at the same time, the Vietnam government is handling their handling of the most serious cases that they have is being communicated to the public on a daily basis. So araw-araw meron silang specific reports na kung ano yung progress ng cases na meron sila. So that's a very high level of public transparency for them. That's why there is a legitimate accountability of government officials, dahil um, yung mga local officials na who are identified, that are actually committing um, corruption scandals in the middle of this crisis are being put into jail even there's a pandemic, no? So kahit na merong crisis, the Vietnamese government is making sure na walang ligtas, no? Na lahat ng ng may sala, okay? They are being held accountable, especially public officials. So yeah, there are strong efforts from the local officials, and also it can be attributed na yung success story ng Vietnam is actually from the collectivist culture, no, that their society possess. Of course, because of their long tradition of Confucius, and of course to um, the culture na meron sila, no, the nationalistic identity that they have, that they could relate into. So most observers actually pointed out to their nationalism as one of the biggest reasons behind their success story. That's Vietnam for us, no. Definitely a successful model that every state could look into. So now, after Vietnam, we have Thailand. So in Thailand, there is a particular slogan created by the government, quote and unquote, leave no one behind. So ito naman yung ginawa nilang rallying point sa kanilang mga mamamayan, sa kanilang citizens, no, para uh, para matugunan yung needs ng kanilang mga mamamayan. Now, however, even if they have this particular rallying point, or the battle cry of leave no one behind, there is a low government trust rate, given that there is still an after effect of the March 2019 elections that happened. um, some analysts would actually say na the government that Thailand has right now is actually lacking in legitimacy, no. That's why at the same time, given the the pandemic crisis that we are experiencing, it is said that uh, Thailand could actually become the worst affected economy in Southeast Asia, as per the International Monetary Fund. It is because close to 50% of their workforce is forced into what we call as involuntary unemployment. So what do we mean by this? You Thailand, one of the biggest sources uh, of revenues of the Thailand government is their tourism industry, and it is estimated that they actually gain $60 billion annually, no, from local tourism um, revenues. So dahil doon, wala, dahil walang turista, no, walang street vendors, okay. There was also a report na tumataas na rin yung yung bilang, yung cases ng mga namamatay na elephants, because yung mga caretakers nila ay wala na ring maipakain sa kanila, dahil nga sarado at bagsak yung tourism industry. Okay? So, however, the Thai government actually offered stimulus packages naman, and they provided access to social security fund to their people. However, the criticism point is that um, limited yung pwedeng makapag-access ng social security fund na yun because the Thai government actually they are requiring very strict conditions para makapag-apply. Una, they are requiring people to apply online because of course um, if you go to government premises, then that would actually violate social distancing orders, and syempre mawala yung yung sense ng ng community quarantine, di ba? So they are requiring people to apply online. The problem is um sobrang konti lang ng part ng population, no, yung may access sa computer and to internet access. So therefore, kapag hindi ka nakapag-apply online, so there's also no chance of you being granted these stimulus packages. Um, there have been reports na maraming arrest sa kalsada dahil people are starting to protest, no, and they're starting to criticize the government dahil nga street vendors are are protesting na dahil wala silang trabaho and they do not have the means to even apply for the stimulus package. What anong gagawin nila? Diba? What will they do? So at the same time, the battle cry, quote and unquote, leave no one behind, is gaining a lot of criticism dahil mga nakapag-apply naman online, no, mababa pa rin yung percentage na na bibigyan ng stimulus packages. Out of the 90 million applications, only 1.8 million pa lang yung nabibigyan ng grant, often attributed to the mismatch of government records. So people are wondering, no, anong nangyari because yung for example yung mga street vendors, pag nag-apply sila, there is a government mismatch of their records in the government database, and some of them were actually um, rejected for application dahil mali daw yung nilagay nilang trabaho. So some street vendors, of course, they will put in their application forms that they are vendors, right? But the government database are producing different results, no, different may mismatches dun sa government database. That's why it has been trending, no, sa sa Twitter yung hashtag na we are farmers not vendors dahil may government database mismatch na nangyari sa Thailand. Okay? So we have Laos, no? Comes next. Laos being a small country as well, no? They sought help actually to China. Yun ang kanilang naging initial na response. Even though they have also enforced strict lockdowns and social distancing orders, much the same as with everyone, they prioritize seeking help from neighboring states such as China and Vietnam. Dahil it's also an admission to their part na they are not equipped, no? Although there is a relatively low number of cases na meron sa Laos, but it is oftentimes attributed to the limited testing kits that they have. There is also a point of question about the prioritizing the China-Laos railway, no, in which state officials are often quoted na um, na tatanggalin na din yung lockdowns because yung construction ng railway is actually uh, will be more beneficial to the Laos community in the long run. So that's a criticism for them right now. Last but not the least is we have the Brunei Darussalam. You know, relatively small country in terms of um, land mass and population, but they have already restricted religious related activities and yeah, the same social distancing orders that they have. At the same time, their government has allotted efforts, no, to reach out to banks for them to agree na i-defer muna yung loan payments ng mga tao, ng businesses, ng employees up to 6 months, no? For 6 months, deferred yung loan payments na meron sila. At the same time, the government also directed na all employers wag munang bawasan yung sweldo at yung mga leave credits ng mga empleyado sa kanila para naman makarecover ng buo yung mga family. So, even yung mga low-income earners, meron silang natatanggap na salaries from their employees. Alright? So, again, like what I said earlier, no, I'll not be discussing anymore the efforts that we have here in the Philippines dahil mas aware tayo doon, and the Balongibog Talks already produce podcast for that topic, no. So given the details that we have already talked about, no, you see, these are collations of data from international media, both from international and domestic media, if the domestic media that they have permits. Kumuha tayo doon ng data, and then now we are trying to understand kung bakit ganun nagkaiba-iba yung response na meron sila. So I'd like to end the presentation with these 4 points of understanding, in which ito yung pwede nating pagmulan ng takeaways, ito yung pwede nating pagmulan ng understanding, no, as to what was the context behind the decisions of the government to actually act like that. Okay? So, ngayon, sorry. Ayun. So, I have 3, no, points of understanding for the audience. We have the leadership of the current administration, government transparency, and number 3, legitimacy. So, those are my points of understanding, no, para sa lahat. Kasi yung points of understanding natin ay nagsisimula sa leadership, no. Governments that were decisive, implemented public health screening and contact tracing measures. Those who were willing to shut down both international and domestic travel, sila yung nakita natin na may mga models of success. You know, we saw this most clearly in Vietnam and Singapore during the first wave of the pandemic. So leaders who made decisions based on medical and scientific evidence have come out on top. So that's what we noticed. Those leaders who have also made their public health decisions based on short-term economic and political calculations have not been able to get ahead of the situation. So nandun nang gagaling yung contrast, no? Yung mga leader na natagalan sa pag-decide, sa pag-enforce ng kanilang regulations, well, they lost very valuable time. And in a pandemic, with the exponential growth, no, yung nature ng pandemic na exponential siya, lumalawak siya, everyday matters. So it is also an observation na a successful governmental response has nothing to do with the regime type that they have. So we actually witnessed some democracies in Asia like Taiwan, South Korea, and even outside of Asia like New Zealand, no? They had fantastic responses and they had fantastic results as of now. So they are democracies, but this is not a guarantee. Well, huwag na tayong lumayo, no? The Philippines being a democratic country and Indonesia as well, we have floundered as to how we will be responding to such crisis. Likewise, some autocracies have done a good job. So, while others may say na disadvantage yung mga autocratic states because they could also disclose public information, we see na the autocracies that we know are actually at the forefront of the virus denial, no? The government success in flattening the curve is the result of leadership and competent government administration regardless of regime type. So that's also something that we could observe. Furthermore, no government should be blamed for a pandemic. That's very clear, no? But they should be scrutinized for how they respond. So at the same time, it's an issue right now na those governments that use the pandemic to accumulate power, attack the media, and silence critics have fared poorly. So using emergency powers in such ways only serves to build mistrust. If authoritarian leaders such as the Prime Minister of Cambodia, Hun Sen, or our Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, if they're looking at a pandemic as a political opportunity instead of a public health crisis, their priorities are terribly misplaced and people will die as a result. So the Cambodian parliament passed a law granting the Prime Minister a sweeping new powers, including the ability to conduct electronic eavesdropping and curtailment of freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. Well, in our case, yung emergency powers given to to Duterte was involving the ability to take over utilities and private firms. No, well, effectively responding to a pandemic requires a whole of a government approach. Yung sinasabi natin, governments that had a holistic strategy to deal with food supply and public health, create broad-based stimulus packages, and mitigate the economic slowdown were able to win public trust and compliance. So this requires effective interministerial coordination. So I think people are already smart enough, no, and they have um, well in most countries, no, because of internet access, they are given so much public information to the point nga na yung iba misleading, di ba? But we have already those points of criticism and understanding to our government, to the administration. Hence, pwede natin i-criticize sila, and it's not a bad thing to do, especially in such crisis that is happening. Um, that's leadership administration. With regard to government transparency naman, we will notice na the governments that communicated with their public in a transparent manner tended to quickly win the confidence of their public. So sabi nga natin, di ba, public office is public trust. That's why the governments that admitted the problem, communicated the risk, outlined effective mitigation efforts, and spoke with one voice have fared much better than governments which have multiple speakers or leaders who downplayed the threat. Okay? Also, it is better than those who have publicly reversed their policies and look for scapegoats, di ba? Yung nagtuturoan, and repeated conspiracy theories. So, greater trust led to much greater social compliance when it came to wearing mask, social distancing, and sheltering in place. So, as an example, sabi nga natin, the Prime Minister of Singapore, di ba, and of Vietnam, they have been models of effective communication and transparency. Vietnam is a fully authoritarian state, okay? And Singapore is quasi-authoritarian. But these regime types are actually not always prone to transparency, di ba, as we know. But both know that in public health, transparency matters and communication lines are essential. So Vietnam in particular, you know, um, well, sabi nga natin, they are being applauded by the international community and they also made use of social media such as yung kanilang mga TikTok dances, no, and they even released catchy hand washing songs, no. When SARS hit them in 2003, the Vietnamese government acted a lot like China, no. At first, they denied the problem, they covered it up, they they denied access to international health officials, and they even failed to communicate openly and honestly with the public. So after a disastrous initial response na nangyari, well, the government reversed its course, and since then, they have become a model of transparency and effective communication. Some pundits also would like to point na na mag-eleksyon na din kasi sa Vietnam. That's why public officials are also using this opportunity to um, raise their ratings to the public. But even so, um, in such crisis, results are more important, and that's what Vietnam is showing everyone, right? On the contrary, mm, Indonesia might be a democracy, di ba? With a fairly press. But President Widodo downplayed on record, no, the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then afterwards publicly admitting na he downplayed the threat while peddling nonsense about herbal remedies. So the Minister of Health attributed the early lack of cases to prayer. Sabi nga natin, there are multiple messages coming out of the government as well, and policies have been repeatedly reversed. So yung inconsistencies ng government policies, nakikita ng tao eh. Nararamdaman siya ng tao, especially in such times na isolated tayo, wala tayong ibang pagtutuunan ng pansin kundi kung ano ang response ng government. Madaling manonotice siya ng tao. No? Also in Thailand, di ba? Their public health leaders have looked to scapegoats and even made outrageous assertions. Sinasabi pa nila na ang dapat daw sisihin ay yung foreign nationals nila dahil yung Thai public health minister was also quoted na yung Europeans daw kasi na nasa Thailand ay madudumi because they do not take their showers, no? So in the Philippines naman, well, sabi natin, the people want facts, no, and not any blunders or tirades of public officials. We are even faced with threats of shooting people who violate quarantine. So that's government transparency as a second point. Now, lastly, I'd like to point out that legitimacy is also a a point of understanding in this context because yung public trust is tied with this particular issue, yung government legitimacy. So governments that had low levels of legitimacy, which leads to corresponding low levels of public, actually fared more poorly. Legitimacy leads to greater public trust, as we know, and thereby to greater social compliance na din, sinabi natin kanina. So we are not saying that legitimacy is absolutely equated with with democracy because, like for example, sabi nga natin kanina, yung models ng Vietnam and Singapore, they are not democratic states, right? They garnered their legitimacy via performance and not democratic polls. Okay, at the same time, in February, the Malaysian government came into power following a political coup d'etat that established a pan-Malay government. And in effect, it overturned a popular election, the results of which came in 2018. Now, this government is widely being seen as illegitimate, no? Oftentimes being referred by international political analysts as a backdoor government. So, it was a point of question earlier because the new prime minister's first action was he wanted to delay the creation of the parliament because they didn't want a vote of no confidence, no? Ganun yung naging response ng Malaysian government. So at the same time, Thailand had elections in March 2019, but one could hardly call the government legitimate following a coup, a constitution that weakened large parties and many gerrymandered districts. So maraming nag-criticize na the existing government is not actually legitimate. Okay? Along with the government's widely inconsistent pandemic response, well, it has done little, no, to enhance their legitimacy. So, the sabi nga natin, the Thai public health minister kanina, no, was often quoted saying na kailangan pauwiin yung mga European nationals kasi sila yung may dala nung pandemic. And yet, even if madaming citizens, no, even if madaming Thai citizens yung nagsasabi na kailangan na siyang palitan as a minister, until now, siya pa rin yung nandun because he controls a key coalition partner eh. Yung party na yung majority party ngayon ng government ay hawak niya. So therefore, hindi pa rin siya pinapalitan. So balik tayo dito sa atin because uh, yung issue din ng Pilipinas ay magandang punto ng usapin ng pagdating ng legitimacy, no? um, like the Philippines, the Indonesian government also came to power by elections, but it is being actually is weak in Southeast Asia. So Indonesia has been a failure, no? Masabi natin because despite the fact that the president already is in his second term, no, and even if the president garnered 55% of the vote during the elections, well, he should have been better prepared, no? Andun na sana yung suporta ng tao, ng citizens, but the response was uh, also, no, so to speak. Again, the president admitted to covering up the spread of the virus, no, and he even encouraged tourism as other countries were locking down. So, yun din yun. He even allowed post-Ramadan travel, no, which further spread the disease across the archipelago, and the Indonesian authorities also used criminal defamation laws to crack down on public criticism of the government. So, as of now, the Philippines has the third highest number of COVID-19 cases in Southeast Asia, with the second highest case fatality rate. The president's response has been inconsistent and ham-fisted. After doing nothing for weeks, no, well, Duterte did what he normally does. He lashed out. He lashed out at critics, and well, probably he expected the Chinese leadership to come to his rescue. No, well, like the Thai government, Duterte has tried to use the crisis also to silence critics and accumulate more power. um, Ito na yun. This is at a time wherein his populist tendencies or his populist characteristics are being exposed talaga. Malabas na siya, no? The higher rates of poverty in our country will definitely exacerbate the pandemic spread with such a large percentage of the population living at the poverty line. The ability of our population to shelter in place and not work is very minimal. That's why makikita nyo, no, pag nagre-release nung social amelioration program, nagkakagulo ang tao, kahit may community quarantines tayo, lumalabas pa rin sila because they 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 do not feel the response of the government being enough to make them feel secure as well. So, um, at the same time, babalik tayo dun sa success story natin na Vietnam. They have far less money at their disposal, but they were able to enact a broad-based stimulus and even immediate cash payouts to businesses and affected citizens. So you see, it's not really a matter of the regime type, but more of the leadership abilities, the government transparency, and at the same time, the legitimacy that we have. Okay, so that's it, I guess, for me. Those are the points of undertaking that I could share with the audience right now. But as expected, no, this is this will be a rich source of literature and studies in the coming weeks and years, na pagkukunan ng studies ng mga scholars natin because this is an experience, no, that is shared by everyone, not only domestically or locally, but around the world. So this is also a good time for us to be more knowledgeable and more informed, rightfully informed, no, of the things that is happening around us. So with that, I guess that's it. Thank you for your time for this morning, and Diyos maray na aga sa gabos.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Darren, for that very wonderful lecture. It's very insightful. At least I guess our participants and our future participants, once we uploaded this, will get um, a glimpse of various responses of the ASEAN communities. So we have three three questions or may mga questions na tayo. So let me read those questions. Okay. Uh, okay. There is a question from Edwin Valenzuela. Okay. Thanks for including in this webinar. My concern will be how the Philippines came up to address the pandemic, especially in implementing the new normal. What is new normal in Philippine politics? Thanks.
Uh, well, it's interesting, no, dahil sabi nga natin kanina, um, it took a pandemic to actually for people to actually realize kung hanggang saan yung capabilities ng administration, hindi lang sa atin kundi sa sa lahat ng estado sa buong mundo. So the question is, how the Philippines came up to address the pandemic, especially in implementing the new normal. I guess it is still uncertain at this point because ngayon, 'di ba, May 11, and the general community quarantine in a lot of areas in the Philippines is still being implemented up until this Friday, and there have already been reports from government authorities na yung yung enhanced community quarantine will be extended, especially in Metro Manila, and yung mga nasa GCQ ay ganun pa rin ang mangyayari. So I guess it's relatively early for us to say kung ano yung magiging situation na meron tayo. But looking at where we are right now, um, if mass testing is not conducted, when we say mass testing, ibig sabihin, you prioritize the frontliners, no? You prioritize yung mga nasa operations na meron tayo. There will be a more accurate and truthful record of the number of cases that we have. So mas madali sanang mag-response yung government. Ang nagiging kasing point of reference pa natin is yung declining number daw ng cases na meron tayo, just because very limited yung tayo. So therefore, hindi talaga natin alam kung ano yung totoo at kung ano yung accurate number ng cases na meron tayo. Some cases will be reported diretso death agad, tas attributed na siya sa COVID-19, di ba? And who knows ano yung pwedeng nagawa ng government from the time na sana kung na test pa lang siya na positive, from the time na namatay yung concerned citizen na meron tayo. So unless we have mass testing, incredible mass testing, and I think yung new normal pa rin sa atin is very uncertain. Titingnan natin on Friday yung announcement na ating health authorities.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for answering the question. There's another question from Kevin Borha. Okay. It is very clear, but based on the lecture as well, is putting extraordinary stress on our political system, leading to some expansion of executive power. His question is, what developments concern you, and what can we do to safeguard our democracy then in this time of crisis? The traditions, norms, institutions, etc.
Well, it's a very timely question, no, from Kervin, na it's not a long time ago na ang hot issue sa atin ay yung shutdown ng one of the biggest media outlets na meron tayo, yung ABS-CBN. And so most people I guess would actually attribute it to abuse of authority, an excess use of authority siguro, uh, or probably a uh, misuse of power at the same time. And so, um, ano yung pwede nating gawin? At the same time, yung demokrasya na meron tayo, yung ini-enjoy natin, we have to maximize it, no, in ways that we can. Um, we are still fortunate that we can still conduct such lectures such as like this, no. We can still conduct conversations like this. Hindi pa tayo kagaya ng ibang states na kapag may nag-uusap tungkol sa pandemic, tungkol sa response ng government, ay inaaresto agad. So in this time of national crisis, mas okay pa rin na we find solidarity in others, no. We find the comfort in the community na we are, sabi nga natin, may tagline na we heal as one, pero at the same time tayo din yung nagbabangayan sa social media. That could actually be one of the biggest platforms that we could utilize, right? And remember the time when the Bureau of Internal Revenue was very strict na hindi sila mag-extend ng income tax return payments, right? Scheduled on April 15, but due to the clamor of the people, ganun, they were forced to extend it to June 15, right? So it's the power of information, it's the power of democracy that we have right now. Andito pa rin sa atin. Um, be rightfully informed, talk to people, no? Although not literally na fake, kasi syempre we are prohibited from face-to-face interactions, pero you could join lectures such as this one will enable us to widen our perspective on things. So this is a good time to aware, no, and to learn many things na nangyayari sa atin, uh, na kasi isolated nga tayo. So so we could make use of the time to uh, maximize na yung platforms na meron tayo such as this one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's a series of questions. Nagbalos na. Okay. So let me read. I guess paano ba? Isahan na lang or isa-isahin ko muna. Then
Sige.
I'll ask the question and then you answer. Okay. So thanks for the interesting lecture, Darren. So here my question from Professor Rogeria. Um, the first question is, how do you contrast Vietnam's response with the Philippines? What did Vietnam do to effectively flatten the curve these past few months? Or on the other hand, what is the Philippines not doing, thereby keeping our curve up the two? So that's the
Well,
first.
okay. Thank you, Jai, sa pagganti, no. Well, sabi nga natin yung success story, yung model ng Vietnam, nag-result siya sa zero deaths recorded kahit hanggang ngayon. So, we can say na Vietnam was way prepared, no, than the Philippines in responding to such crisis, dahil nga meron na silang specific office talaga dun sa kanilang Ministry of Public Health. Meron na silang allotted budget, no, na kung saan the Office of the Emergency Response to Disease is specifically being given budget by the government to purchase PPEs, no, to purchase masks, to purchase laboratory equipments, even if wala pa naman talagang pandemic. So yun yung binahagi ng ng ano natin, ng Vietnamese government, no, na kung saan long before pandemic came, yung Vietnam was already prepared, okay, siguro hindi naman talaga well, not everyone can absolutely prepare for anything, no. But at least when the pandemic happened, the Vietnamese government were more or less ready in terms of logistics, no. And they have the equipment necessary to not only to contain but um to project kung paano i-contain yung virus, yung pandemic. So yan yung naging kaibahan. At the same time, yung transparency and accountability ng government nila is mataas compared sa atin. Local officials have been held accountable even in the middle of crisis, no. May mga hinuhuli sila at kinukulong ng mga local officials na hindi binibigay o hindi nire-release yung payouts ng mga tao. So I think that's a big thing because yung social compliance is mataas kapag mataas din yung trust ng tao sa gobyerno.
Okay. The second question, I like the point you made on how ASEAN cannot make a collective effort against the COVID pandemic. Does the principle of non-intervention maintained among ASEAN states indicate that uh, the association or integration is more economic than political?
Well, we could say that as well, no? You see, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations were founded because, well, geographically tayo yung magkakatabi, no? But at the same time, it was an opportunity for Southeast Asian member states or countries to actually work together and help each other in terms of economic activities. So yung principle of non-interference ng ASEAN is very strict, no. That's why um in Southeast Asia wala tayong international tribunal for human rights. um that's one big concern na meron ang international community sa atin dahil hanggang ngayon wala tayong tribunal for human rights violation. Because member states in ASEAN um, would often prefer to respect yung history na meron ang kanya-kanyang ASEAN member states. We do not we no longer need to point out kung sino yung mga mga bansa na matataas yung human rights violation, no, in history, but that's a fact, no, that's a fact that everyone knows. So therefore lumalabas din siya sa ganitong crisis na when you actually visit yung official website ng ASEAN, what you will actually get is more of yung collective response nila is more on sharing information, sharing ideas, rather than collective political actions, no, because the non-interference, no, prohibits them to do so. So we are still not held liable because syempre may principle pa rin tayo ng sovereignty, no, number one. But at the same time, we this is the setup that the ASEAN is built.
Okay, thank you. The third question from Professor Rogeria is, aside from the Philippines, who among the ASEAN states fell prey to China's debt trap or debt diplomacy? You mentioned Laos turned to China for aid. Were there other states?
Oh well, um actually madami, no, madami. Surprisingly, even if the pandemic is largely attributed to, of course, to China, no, um, neighboring countries uh, been hesitant to seek for help considering na kailangan talaga. 'Di ba, kahit nga tayo in the Philippines, we were still forced to play the hand of being a debtor again, no, na kailangan ulit ng pondo, ganyan. So in the case of Laos, there is actually an ongoing construction, yun ngang China to Laos railway, na the plan actually is for the railway to be built hanggang Singapore. So it's a connecting railway from China up until Singapore. So imagine the economic activities na mapuproduce niyan. And yan actually yung criticism sa Laos government, na mas nagiging priority nila yung pag-continue ng construction. Well, number one, because they are indebted to China. And number two, they have domestic workers na nakadepende dun ang livelihood. So they have no other recourse but also to look at it kung pwede ba siyang pagbuksan na muli. Aside from Laos, Cambodia is also um, one of the states na malalim yung relationship with China. Malalim yung kanilang economic and friendship ties. Same time, um, one case also na interesting to look into is yung East Timor, no? Again, East Timor is a sovereign state in terms of of the yung legitimacy na meron sila sa ngayon. They are just not admitted to the ASEAN as an official member state yet, okay? But surprisingly and admirably, yung East Timor is actually trying its very best to combat the pandemic on its own. Pero syempre, because limited capacities in terms of infrastructure and economic capabilities, they also have to to seek out to seek for help to neighboring countries, and China is also included to that.
Okay. At the moment, we have two questions. Okay. There's a question from Vanessa. It was started earlier. It was stated earlier that Vietnam is one of the most successful countries in combating the current pandemic because of its previous experiences on the SARS and H1N1 pandemic. This is also true for the success Taiwan did in mitigating the spread of COVID-19 in their country. So is Vietnam the only country in Southeast Asia that has previous experience on pandemics that made it well prepared with the attack of COVID-19, or are there also other factors?
Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Well, you see, yung siguro masyado pa kasi tayong bata no nung dumating yung SARS ng 2002. We could only look at it through historical lenses, but you see, hindi siya umabot sa ganitong kalawak na level in terms of of a crisis. There was an outbreak, but in terms of this magnitude, I think it's not comparable. But what made it very crucial is that um, the consciousness of Vietnam, and I will say na yung Singapore as well, no, the consciousness of the states to actually look into the future and prepare themselves. Ano yun, malaking bagay yun. um, at the same time, yung Singapore kasi may advantage siya because, well, they are capable, they are financially capable, have the means to actually um, they have the means to conduct further studies, to conduct further researches at the same time. Pero yung case kasi ng Vietnam, it's more of their own mindset of preparing, na they anticipated kasi at that time yung mga epidemiologists, yung mga virologists, they were claiming na this will be a cycle, na of course that I am not a medical expert, no, but we on the very little knowledge that the public has, yung virus is may tendency siya na na ano na uh, na 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 maging immune, na nag-evolve din siya at the same time, if I'm not mistaken. So at the same time, it was a look into the future, no, ng Vietnam. They were um they were kumbaga, they were conscious enough, or pwede rin natin sabihin na they were afraid enough na they might not survive a pandemic if they are not prepared. So that's also the thing, no? At the same time, maganda din siguro yung natingnan na yung leadership regimes ng dalawang estado na to, yung Vietnam at Singapore, ay consistent siya compared sa meron tayo, for example, sa Pilipinas na pabago yung administration. So that also helps, no, yung political mindset na meron, yung continuity din syempre ng political mindset ng leaders ng isang bansa.
Okay. Okay, questions are coming in. So, I guess, is it okay, sir? Entertain pa natin yung mga questions.
Sige, ikaw bahala, sir.
Okay. Another question from Kevin Borga. Supplemental question po, given the need for social distancing and given the uncertain timeline of this pandemic, so so what are the greatest risks you see to the forthcoming election? What do you think are the steps that can be taken now to ensure that a fair and representative election would take place in 2022 to safeguard our democracy? Thank you.
Okay, so ito si Mr. Borja, futuristic na talaga ito. Ina-anticipate niya na yung yung effects sa 2022 election. And it's a good place to also look into, no? Because kagaya nga, if we do comparative analysis to to states, yung iba nga sinasabi, 'di ba, na Vietnam officials also are using this opportunity to maximize yung kanilang trust rating sa public. But in fairness, they produce results, and I think that's what matters most as of the moment, right? So sa atin naman sa Pilipinas, kung bibilangin mo, parang matagal pa yung 2022 elections, pero it's just actually around the corner, no? We are already in the mid 2020, no? And if not for the pandemic, yung news feed natin is usually puno na yan ng speculations as to sino yung tatakbong next na president, or in our case recently, di ba, there was also questions on constitutional change, right? So yun, isa pa yun. So with eyes set on 2022 elections, I think it's a good way for us. It's a good opportunity for us to remember these experiences, no? Remember this scenarios, itong mga pagkakataon na to. Tapos balikan natin, because this should be a big factor in deciding as to how we will set up our next government officials. Paano natin i-elect, no? Sino ang i-elect natin, o what were their priorities, their political agenda. Okay, it's not saying naman na we put color to things that that they do during these times, no? Na it will also be unfair to those who are genuinely reaching out for help as well. But at the same time, again, given the access to information na meron tayo, it is a good time for us to be rightfully informed and to remember these experiences, and we take this into consideration in the forthcoming elections. Okay, na with in mind probably na if ever magkaroon ulit ng isang cycle ng pandemic in our lifetime, ano yung best course of action ng government officials na i-elect natin? Okay, and I think na in the coming elections, no, magiging malaking tanong din ng taong bayan kung ano ang platforms ng officials pagdating sa public healthcare system na meron tayo. Dahil yun yung isa sa mga pinakamalaking butas na meron ang Philippine government natin. public healthcare, social security, even yung mga health insurances systems na meron tayo. So probably ilagay natin to, ibaon natin yung lista ngayon pa lang.
Okay. Kaya nga meron na minsan yung first weeks ng pandemic, there's hashtag election 2020, 2022. So that
Yun.
maalala natin yung what will happen in the next 2 years. Kung sino yung mga politicians who's responding very well to address this issue, our public health issue. So there's another question from A Sabad. Great lecture, sir. My question is, what are the actions being taken by ASEAN countries in protecting their maritime territories against China while addressing this pandemic?
Oo. This is an interesting question from Mr. August Cesar Abad. You see, this is one of the recent political issues na medyo nasa set aside. Especially dahil people will think na hindi naman natin priority yan, na ano ang gagawin natin sa political territories if people are not healthy enough to live in it or to even fight for it, di ba? But at the same time, this is also not the time to lax, na i-relax yung policies natin pagdating diyan. Although kahit naman nga wala pa yung pandemic, di ba? It is notable na there are certain yung enforcement natin ng restriction dyan sa maritime territories is very lenient. But at the same time, I think it's not a lost cause kung gugustuhin natin. It's not a lost cause kung gustuhin natin. Vietnam is continuously protecting its claim, to also to their claimed territories. But sa atin ngayon, nasa-set aside siya. Wala kang maririnig dyan na balita for now, with regard to our claim, our defense of the maritime territories. So I think maganda din siyang pagtuunan ng pansin na wag makalimot at the same time,
Okay. Ayun, nakahabol pa si Dr. Acabado. Okay. Or maybe last question from our participants or insights. Okay. There's an insight, I guess, kanina from wait. Okay. I think from Edwin Valenzuela. I think regarding insights, if the Duterte admin imposed travel restrictions since January, then we have to manage the infections very well. Yung sabi ni I think it's talking about the travel restrictions, like what Vietnam and what Taiwan did. So do you think, sir, will yung travel restrictions is very important for to sana prevent the spread of the pandemic in the Philippines?
Well, definitely, that was supposedly the initial and the most immediate response that the administration should have done, yung pag-impose ng travel bans. Yun yung dapat na naging primary response nila because alam naman natin kung saan yung naging source ng virus, 'di ba, ng pandemic. So therefore it is only logical na dapat nagkaroon tayo ng travel restrictions. What happened was, first we downplayed the threat. We downplayed the threat, and second, we put more emphasis and importance to our relations to China, okay, than actually securing the safety of the people, the public health. So it was supposedly dapat parang reflect sana siya, immediate reaction sana siya ng government na may threat. So you have to restrict travel, di ba? Well, yun, nahuli tayo. And you also see the results to some neighboring states such as Cambodia na talagang winelcome pa nila yung mga Chinese nationals for a longer time, no? But at the same time, we could also see that in how Vietnam handled it. Sila talagang first reported case, nag-lockdown, they suspended all mass gatherings, social gatherings, they restricted religious related activities, and they imposed strict lockdowns, and yun, wala na silang pinapasok. Even domestic travels were already prohibited. So that was supposedly the first logical move that they did, no, given na logistically speaking, kailangan yun ang mas madali sanang gawin. You impose travel ban, you close airports, you close the different entry and exit points in the country. Tapos saka tayo nagdesisyon, saka tayo nagplano ano nang sunod natin gagawin.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Darren, and thank you to our participants and our panelists. So even though we don't have Facebook Live at the moment, so this is still a very engaging conversation this morning. So it's 12 noon, magto 12 noon na sa Philippines. So I guess we can have our lunch and for if may mga kahaputan pa or questions, you may we'll be uploading this later at the museum page, and you can or you can just write your comments. So we'll ask Sir Darren to answer those questions.
Okay.
So thank you everyone. Thank you to our panelists, and salamat Sir Buboy pag dumating din.
Thank you po, sir.
Okay. He's also Bicolano. Thank you to Professor Logeria, Asabad, Professor Pipay, and Professor Karen, and Professor Atole. And thank you, Professor Acabado. And of course, thank you, Sir Darren, for that, for having for delivering another talk this morning. So, mabalos na maray.
Thank you, Earl.
Okay.